Okay, good morning. I'm David Weiss. I'm a distinguished professor of physics in the Eberly College of Science, and I'm happy to welcome you here to the final talk of this 2025 Ashtekar Frontiers of Science lecture series. This is the end of the 31st year of this lecture series. It was founded in 1995 by Abai Ashtekar, who is over there, and and he did it when he first came to Penn State and set up an institute, which is now the Institute for Gravitation in the Cosmos at Penn State. It's been a very successful outreach event over the years. The first 25 years were shepherded by Barbara Kennedy, and recently her duties have been assumed by Heather Robbins, who's really responsible for making this whole thing happen now. The lecture series this year is titled 2025, the Year of the Quantum, and it's part of the UNESCO International Year of Quantum Science and Technology, which was designated to recognize the worldwide importance of quantum science and the need for wider awareness of its past and future impact. So the reason this is the year of quantum science and technology is because it's the 100th anniversary of a very famous series of papers by Werner Heisenberg, Max Born, and Ernst Schrödinger. And that followed on about 20 years of work, and there's been a lot of work since then. So since it's 100 years, it seems like a good time to recognize it. Now, classical mechanics, which is what came before quantum mechanics, is usually a good approximation about the world, but the world in general is actually described by quantum mechanics. Push comes to shove, it's always quantum mechanics which is the right thing. And there are many natural phenomena that you can really only understand if you're using quantum mechanics. That is, there are things that were mysteries in terms of how they actually worked until quantum mechanics was founded. So that includes atoms and molecules, which don't really make sense without quantum mechanics. Rocks and minerals, things that form solid, don't really make sense without quantum mechanics. Photosynthesis, vision, all those things depend upon fundamental aspects of quantum science. Permanent magnets are a quantum mechanical effect. Neutron stars, not something you come across every day, but it's it's an astrophysical object of a large size, which depends upon quantum mechanics for understanding how it works. And then many more things. Now, in the last 100 years, there are also, apart from understanding things about the natural world, there's a lot of technology which you don't normally think about as quantum mechanical, but they are really based upon understanding quantum mechanics. So that includes lasers, that includes semiconductors, which are pervasive in the world. It includes magnetic resonance imaging and GPS, which you use to find out where you are on the Earth, all based upon fundamentally quantum technologies. Solar cells, electron microscopes, video and digital cameras, including many of the things that are actually in your iPhone, are built upon quantum mechanical advances. Superconductors, we don't have magnetic levitation trains in the US, but they exist, and it's built upon quantum mechanics. Also many more. So looking forward, as part of what the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology was about, was thinking about what the future of quantum mechanics will be. It's sometimes called the second quantum revolution. And in my short introduction, I don't really have enough time to go through what quantum mechanics is. Marcos will give you a little sense as he goes through it. But there are basic elements like the quantization of energy levels. There are wave functions which exhibit properties of coherence and superposition. And then there's entanglement, which is the most mysterious, unusual aspect of quantum mechanics. And I show you this picture of Quinny and her dual sister. That's just to show you that the International Year of Quantum Science Technology is a real thing because they have mascots. Those are the mascots, Quinny and her sister. The new types of applications of quantum mechanics, which are the things which have been developed over the last 20 or 30 years and are continuing to be the frontier of science, include things like quantum sensing, quantum communication, quantum simulation, quantum materials, and quantum computing. So I just say as background, quantum mechanics is really very well understood. even though there's a lot of famous quotes that are flying about people not really understanding quantum mechanics, really we understand it in a functional way extremely well. And it's long been essential to physics and technology, and but there are still advances being made, new understandings all the time, including things that we'll get from the next talk. So the next talk will be given by Professor Marcos Rigol, who's a distinguished professor in my department as well, entitled Tale of Two Gases, Classical and Quantum. So before he came to us, Professor Rigol got his bachelor's degree and master's of science in Havana, Cuba. And then he moved to get a PhD in Stuttgart, Germany, and then did a tour of California doing postdocs, and then became a assistant professor and then associate professor of physics at Georgetown University before we were very happy to be able to bring him here to Penn State. He's a theorist. He studies quantum systems, and usually with many particles in those systems, and the systems can either be in equilibrium or out of equilibrium. And out of equilibrium quantum many-body systems is really a major frontier in quantum science. His work is sometimes considered to be atomic physics, sometimes condensed matter physics. He works with numerical work that is doing things like computers, but also analytical work. He's really an extremely broad physicist. He's been widely recognized. He's an APS fellow, a AAAS fellow. He's he was at one point a Kavli fellow of the National Academy of Science. He's also respected by his peers. He was elected chair of DCOMP in 2016, which is a division of the American Physical Society. From Penn State, he's won the Faculty Scholar Medal. In the past, he's won other things, including being among the most highly cited researchers in the world. And before I just directly introduce him, I want to note that after the lecture, there are graduate students Cristobal Vallejos and Katie Ann, who will lead a moderated question and answer session with Marcos. So you should have received pen and paper or pencil and paper, and you can, if you would just write down the questions that come up as Marcos is giving the talk, they will collect them at the end, and then you'll have a Q&A session. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and my colleague, Marcos Rigol, who will talk about Tale of Two Gases.
Okay, Dave, thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you everyone for joining us today, celebrating 100 years of quantum mechanics. So this talk, I'm going to be actually not only talking about quantum mechanics, but drawing some things from classical physics that can help us understand some non-intuitive things of quantum mechanics. So normally when physicists discuss quantum theory, we like to emphasize the differences, right, between quantum theory and classical theory. And I'm going to be highlighting difference between quantum and classical. But I also want to emphasize things that are fundamentally the same for both. So there are principles that apply both to quantum and to classical, and I will also emphasize those in my talk. And so this, I'm going to be discussing classical physics and quantum physics in the context of gases. Okay, so they will give us some context that will help us think about them. So without further ado, let me just come back to some of the things that Dave mentioned. So quantum physics. So quantum mechanics is 100 years. Quantum physics is a bit older than that. It's about 120 years. It began to be developed in the early 1900s with seminal work by Max Planck. So it shouldn't be surprising that these days, if you have an equation that describes a quantum phenomenon, it will have this h bar reduced Planck constant on it. So if it doesn't have it, probably not quantum. So classical physics is a bit older than that. Its birth, is usually associated with Newton's Principia, and it's about 350 years old. So now, as Dave mentioned, so the world is quantum, okay? So everything is quantum, but I'm going to be focusing on quantum from the point of view of motion, Okay, so let's think, when is it that something, and what is it that quantum physics describes when you think in terms of motion? So it describes things that are very small, okay, maybe atoms and molecules when they are very cold. And one very unintuitive thing about quantum physics is that those objects, right, they are constrained by the uncertainty principle. So essentially, we cannot know the position and the speed of an object with arbitrary precision. The uncertainty principle tells us that there is a limit to how much we can know about both of them simultaneously. Those small objects, we need then a wave function to describe them. And another very non-intuitive thing that comes out of quantum physics is energy quantization. In classical physics, we are used to saying, like, you add energy to an object, you can add as much as you want. In quantum physics, it doesn't work that way. So there are discrete energy levels, there is quantization, and you will have to add them in jumps. Okay, and that's very important, and a lot of physical phenomena that occur and are very important in technologies are due to that. So really, quantum physics is unintuitive because we are not used to these things. So classical physics, on the other hand, what is it that it describes? It describes things that are large enough. And you see the boundary between quantum physics and classical physics is a fuzzy one. Okay? And you will see today that I will cool down something and it will go from classical to quantum. So something that has bothered philosophers over the years is the deterministic nature of classical physics. So if you know everything about a system at a given instant of time in classical physics, you can find what will happen to the system later. Okay, so that's determinism. So I will show you that there is a caveat to that. And all you need to do is solve Newton's equations or Newton's law, and you will find out. And the other thing is that we are very used to is that objects follow trajectories, right? So we all look at sports, and we can follow the trajectory of a ball, and that's part of our intuition as to how things move. That's not the case in a quantum world. Okay, so it's intuitive, but I will make the point in this lecture that you can draw from classical physics, but not from one object, from many objects, to gain intuition about what happens with quantum physics. Okay, we're going to be doing this in this lecture. Good, so I told you there that objects that are large enough, so let me start this short journey on classical physics with celestial mechanics, right? So stars, surely enough, they are big enough, right? So the simplest problem of celestial mechanics is what we call the one-body problem. What is that problem? Well, it's essentially the problem of a planet orbiting a very heavy star, right? So we call it a one-body problem because the planet, the mass is so small, it doesn't affect the star. So we can just think as the star just providing the gravitational pull, and the planet is just moving in there. Right? Well, we have equations that if we plug in those equations, the position of the planet and its velocity at any given instant of time, we can follow the trajectory of the planet. So that's a problem that we can solve, and we teach our undergraduate students how to solve that. Good? So that's one body. Now, if instead of having, you see, a heavy star and a very light planet, suppose we have two stars, right? One star, of course, is going to affect the other one, and they are going to somehow dance around their center of mass. So this is another problem that we can solve exactly. So this is now the dance of two blue stars. Those are very heavy stars, and we can follow their trajectory. Now, interestingly enough, the way we solve this problem is by converting this two-body problem into two independent one-body problems. One from the motion of the center of mass, and one for the motion, the relative motion between the two stars, right? So you could say we are in good shape in classical physics. We solve the one body, the two body, let's solve the three body. Well, there are no equations that solve the three body problem, right? It's amazing, it's like a wall, you hit a wall, you are solving 1, 2, you cannot solve 3 for any initial condition. Okay, so, and there are solutions for some specific conditions that have some beautiful motion, but that's not generic. Now you could say, well, who cares? We have computers these days, we can just solve it numerically, right? So we just put it in the computer and solve it, and this is, for example, the motion of, it should have been, this should have moved. I don't know why the animation is not working, but this is, oh, let me just see. You see it in there. Okay, good. So that's a motion of three equal mass objects that start in the corners of an equilateral triangle. So now there is something very interesting and unintuitive that happens in here. So, right, so when we are thinking about one body, right, you throw a ball, you slightly change the speed and the angle, it's going to fall close by where it fell the first time, right? So when you have three bodies, what happens is you just change one of those initially a little bit, and after they are going to end up in completely different places. So it's very different from one body. And that's what we call chaos. Okay, so it's deterministic, but if you see you solve a three-body problem and you slightly modify it and you run it again, it will end up completely different place. So one solution will tell you nothing about the next solution. Now, there is another thing that comes out of this. So if you want to know the positions at very long times, you need to know the initial conditions, right, where these masses are and how fast they are moving with increasingly higher precision, okay, because small changes will bring you a completely different place. So this is something that has fascinated physicists and writers along and people in general, and it's actually the main concern of this, the Trisolaran civilization in this novel, which there is now a show about it. So they are very advanced civilization, but they haven't figured out the three-body problem, and you know, their existence depends on that. Now, that is really, I was telling you in terms of celestial mechanics, right? Gravitational forces, that's generic for classical systems. So in general, if you have a classical system, you have three or more bodies interacting, the dynamics is going to be chaotic. So there are some things that we have in popular culture that are related to that. One is the butterfly effect, right? So you've heard about the butterfly effect. Tell us that whether a butterfly is swinging the wings can impact whether a tornado develops 1 week later. Okay, so this is also what is behind the fact that as much as we have advanced in the modeling of the weather and so on, and the computers we are using have the power is increased a lot, we cannot know the weather very well 2 weeks from now. Okay, so it's all because of chaos. Good. So now with that, I'm going to now make the first big transition of this lecture, right? I was telling you about celestial mechanics, so big objects, classical systems. So I'm going to remain classical, but I'm going to move from celestial mechanics to classical gases. Okay, and if we want to put them in a context, let's think about air. Okay, air, we're breathing air. What is air? It's 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 0.9% argon. So everything else in air, 0.1%. Okay, carbon dioxide, all these things that sometimes make our life difficult, very small percentage. Now let's think about air. So they are formed by these molecules, and they are very small, and there are many of them. So there are 10 to the 23 of those atoms and molecules in 1 gallon of air. Right? So now how do you want to think about those atoms and molecules? You want to think, for example, atoms, you can think of them as balls, classically, okay? And diatomic molecules, you can think of them like two atoms. They are coupled, they can move around, they can rotate, okay? And they can vibrate. Okay, so that's a good picture for what they are. So now gases are fluids, and another type of fluid that probably you think more about are liquids, okay? So liquids like gases, they flow, okay? They take the shape of the containers you put them in, and they exert buoyancy force, right? So now you don't think maybe as gases the same way, so I have a demo here to show you that the kind of things that happen for liquids, that is in part of your intuition, happens with gases. So this is what physicists think of a boat, Okay, you have it here. So it's a fish tank is empty, the boat is at the bottom. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add here a gas that is heavier than air. It's sulfur hexafluoride, okay? So I'm gonna open in here, and I'm adding that gas. You don't see it, okay? So it's like I added water in there. So I'm gonna put now my boat, okay? And there it is. So I cannot see where that gas is, but that boat is floating, and actually I can use it now to track how much I'm feeling this. Okay? So the other thing that I can do is I can play with it like you played with boats. So what happens if water gets inside the boat? It sinks, right? So we can fill it out, sinks, right? See it in there. So what do you do if you want it to float again? Remove the water, right? So this is not, the emperor has no clothes. I'm going to reboot it here, and there you go. Okay, so you see there that gases, right? Essentially, like liquids, they exert pressure, they take the shape of the container, and now you may ask, like, how does that work out? Right? You have these atoms and molecules. Where is the pressure coming from? So I have another demo here to show you. There are some bits in there. Okay, I'm going to turn the light. So what you're going to see there is essentially what the atoms are doing in a gas. Okay, so the way I'm going to show you that is I'm going to turn on a vibrator here that is going to give energy to those bits. Okay, so on in there, right? So it's speeding it up, right? So it's adding energy to the bits, and then I'm going to add more energy. Okay? And you see that what is happening is pushing up. What is happening is very similar, right, to what we have in mind will happen to a gas. You heat it up, the pressure increases, right? So it pushes up, right? But then as it pushes up, it's like I've increased the temperature, the pressure pushes up, but the density, right? The volume increases, the density decreases, and the pressure again goes back to the original value, even though the temperature is higher. So essentially the pressure there is the same as the pressure there, okay? So what is different now is the density, okay? So, and the temperature is higher in this. So, but this is what is happening, and that's why we feel pressure, because all these atoms and molecules are colliding with us and with everything around them all the time. And remember, 10 to the 23 of those, okay? Many more than that. 10 to the 23, 23 zeros following, okay? So, good. So now that we have some picture of what is happening with the gases, I'm going to lower it in there. At the end of the lecture, you are all welcome to come down and take a closer look to this demo. So we are going to remain, we're going to be around and help you with that. So good. So that's what is happening in air around us. Huh? So, but let's just see. We just saw that demo, and things that you can take out of this lecture is I was telling you I was adding energy, so temperature and pressure are proportional to how much energy atoms have, okay? And the other thing that I showed you is that the pressure is also proportional to the density. Remember, pressure, you saw it in there, is through collisions, and the higher the density, more collisions, higher pressure. Now, temperature and pressure are assigned to gases that are in equilibrium, right? And that was a part that I didn't explain you there, because you have that vibrator. It was, if you want, heating up some of the bits at the bottom, adding energy, but how is it that the system gets to some temperature and some pressure? So how is it that thermal equilibrium is established? So energy is redistributed by collision. So now in winter, you have your furnaces at home, right? So some part of the air of the house goes through there, is heat up, is pumped into your room, and essentially starts colliding and establishing equilibrium. So what's happening is you have, think of this, you have some molecule, it's moving fast. It went through the furnace, and then you have another one that is slow or at rest, right? So this one is moving fast, it's gonna hit the other one, it's gonna speed it up, and this one is gonna slow down, okay? So that's how we are gonna establish thermal equilibrium, so through collisions. But now we have a problem, right? As physicists, is how do we describe it? I told you that because of chaos, we cannot solve 3 particles, right? With an equation. We can solve it numerically, but imagine 10 to the 23 of those. How do we go about that? That's where this chaos plays a very important role. Because we say that if the system exhibits chaos, it also is going to exhibit ergodicity. Now, what does that mean? That means that what happens in time, as you saw in here, right? We speed up things, and then there are all these collisions. So what happens on average in time, you can derive it by carrying out a completely different average. We call it an ensemble average. It's an average of systems that are in thermal equilibrium. So these ones, we can do the calculations analytically. So we can write equations, and we can obtain results, and that's how we end up with a thermal description of the properties of a gas. Now, here is a thing to keep in mind then. While chaos is bad for getting exact equations and so on, describing the system, and it's bad for predicting the weather too far in advance, it is behind our understanding of thermal equilibrium. Okay, so it's, we cannot solve for the time, but we have equations that solve for this ensemble average. Now, something that comes with this thermal equilibrium, so it's the relation between pressure, density, temperature. And another thing that comes out of it is the fact that you saw in there, you have all this bit moving, they will reach some equilibrium universal distribution. So I'm going to be showing a lot this type of plots in this lecture, so let's get to what they mean. So what is it that is shown here is the probability of having particles, right, moving with some speed, v. Now, in this case, this plot is for the case of oxygen at room temperature. Now, the shape of this curve is a universal shape, right? We have an equation, and all we need to plug in that equations are speeds and masses, and this comes out. So the values are going to change. The shape doesn't depend on which molecule you have and what is the speed. Now, let's take a look at what we get from here. So this is showing us that at very low speed at room temperature, there are very few, the fraction of molecules that we have is small. Very high speed is also small, around 400 meters per second, that you see this is 900 miles per hour, so that's very fast. We have a lot of them, okay? So this is the peaking here, and in all these equations I was telling you about thermal equilibrium, the speed that shows up is this root mean square speed that you see is slightly higher than at the peak. But now, from this you can take that at room temperature, right, all these atoms and molecules, they are moving extremely fast. Good, so this is this universal distribution, and now you can ask yourself, but you told us that there are these time average that are similar, right, to this ensemble average. So what happens if you start with something that is not in equilibrium? How long does it take to get to this distribution? And how big are the fluctuations, right, that the distribution at any instant of time will have compared to this one? So this is a molecular dynamic simulation of 900 hard spheres. And you see what this is, the sphere is in 2 dimensions. They are distributed like this in a box. And you see this is now the probability in here as a function of the speed. And the initial state, you see, is not this thermal equilibrium. Okay? And now we let it run, and it takes a few collisions for, you see, the distribution to become the distribution in thermal equilibrium, and then the fluctuations are small around it. Good, so now let me tell you 2 more things, because I'm going to be showing you a lot of results of this, a lot of plots of this type. So one thing is that sometimes these plots, instead of writing in here the speed, we show the momentum. Okay, and this is just because physicists, we also care about how heavy the objects are. So the momentum is just the mass times this speed. So whenever you see a momentum, a p, just think of it as a speed. Okay, so it's the difference is a proportionality constant. Now, the other thing that we sometimes do, instead of having the speed, which is the magnitude of the velocity, we plot it as a function of the velocities. Okay, so one can have velocities in one direction, x, y, or c. So you will see some plots that have, instead of a speed, velocity, and you will see the shapes are slightly different, but they all are telling you the same thing. Okay, good. So now comes the next big transition of this lecture is let's get quantum. So to get quantum, all you need to do is you take your classical gas and you cool it down, and you should get to the quantum gas. Now, there is a caveat, and the caveat is that you have to do that at very low density, right? We all know what happens if you take water vapor and lower the temperature. You get water, right? You keep lowering the temperature, you get ice. So you are not going to get a quantum gas, right? You're going to get a piece of solid. So experimentalists go through great pains to get those gases at very low density so that they can lower the temperature and get a quantum gas as opposed to a piece of solid, okay? So what happens when you have this very dilute gas and start cooling down? Well, trajectories start to become fuzzy, right? We were used to thinking about, okay, the object is moving along some trajectory, but now the uncertainty principle is going to come to play, and we don't have really a very precise trajectory. The particles start behaving like wave, and that we have this particle-wave duality, and what's happening as you lower the temperature is there is a wavelength, we call the Broglie wavelength, that grows as the temperature goes down. Good, and then essentially you need wave functions to describe the particles as you go to very low temperature. But now, wave function is a very abstract kind of object, so you say, okay, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that in quantum physics, just a single particle already has a distribution of velocities very similar to what I showed you before, a classical gas with many particles, right? So what happens in a classical gas with many particles is you start measuring the velocities or the speed of the particle, you get a distribution. Well, if you have one quantum particle, you still have a distribution, okay? So that's how now you can use ideas that we developed from classical physics to understand quantum physics, okay? So this is the important thing. Already a single particle has a speed distribution. Good, so as you lower the temperature of these classical gases, it turns out that all possible atoms, molecules in nature split in two types. One types are bosons. Bosons are sort of the friendly particles. They like to bunch with each other. And the other type are fermions. Fermions, they don't like each other. They avoid being in the same quantum state. So in the rest of this talk, I have chosen to talk about the friendly particles, the bosons. So this is what happens if you take one of these very dilute gases and lower its temperature to the order of the nanokelvin. A nanokelvin is 10 to the minus 9 Kelvin. This is around negative 460 Fahrenheit. This is about the coldest matter that we have on Earth. Okay, so these are the experiments and the kind of systems that I'm going to be discussing that I want to understand. And this in here is what happens to the velocity distribution as you lower the temperature. So you start with something that is similar to this Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution. Now I should tell you that here in the middle, you see these are velocities, is where the velocity is zero. Okay, and as you lower the temperature, you see that a new type of distribution emerges there. And as you get close to 0 kelvins, absolute zero temperature, then you get this peak, if you want, of particles that have nearly zero velocity. So this is a Bose-Einstein condensate. Now, Bose-Einstein condensates are coherent matter waves. It's like now all the atoms in there behave as an entire quantum state. So they are coherent, and if you want to think of it, what is the difference between here and here? It's similar to the difference between light for from any like regular lamp and a laser. Okay, so this would be regular light, so, and this would be like a laser. So, and those Bose-Einstein condensates have a very interesting property. They flow without resistance, so they are superfluids. Good, but this talk is not about Bose-Einstein condensate, but the things that one can do with them. So you create that in the lab, and now you can do all sorts of things with them. I should tell you that that was realized in 1995, and it was awarded a Nobel Prize in 2001, and this is known as the fifth state of matter. Okay, so you have the gas, the liquid, the solid, the plasma, and then this would be the fifth one. So we now take, or experimentalists take these Bose-Einstein condensates and play with them in many different ways. So one way that is particularly relevant to this talk is they sort of load them in lattices made out of light. Okay, they use lasers to create lattices, and they put those Bose-Einstein condensates in there, and with that they can create systems that can only move, atoms that can only move in one dimension, in 2 dimensions, or in 3 dimensions in a lattice. So, and they can play with the geometry of the lattice. Could be square lattice, or you can change it as you want. And with that, one can study quantum phases, study quantum dynamics, and also do quantum computing. Okay, so now this is the image of what is being done in those labs. So how does the lab look like? So this is how the lab looks like. So this is 1/2 of the optical table in Dave's lab, in one of Dave's labs. So the other part is on this side. And where is the Bose-Einstein condensate in here? Is in this little chamber in there in the middle. So I don't have to tell you how expensive and how much time goes into setting up one of these labs. So, okay, so this is an amazing achievement. And now routinely here at Penn State, right, under my office, and they create those Bose-Einstein condensate, many of them every day. So these developments of putting the Bose-Einstein condensates in the lattices, they started around the early 2000s, and that was the time I was doing my PhD in Stuttgart, and that was the time I started getting interested in understanding quantum dynamics. Okay, so it's a difficult problem, and around that time I started thinking about it. And as I became a postdoc later, then I started wondering, so all these things, and now I'm going to come back to what I have been told you before about classical gases. So all these things that I told you about classical system, ergodicity, and so on, so do they apply to quantum systems? In the early 2000s, we didn't know the answer to that. Okay, so to get an idea of what happens, I mean, for me now it's hard to come back to that time when we didn't know. So I decided to do a numerical experiment. So what was that numerical experiment? The numerical experiment was I prepared a quantum state of particles in one of these 2-dimensional lattices in a piece of it. Okay, put a quantum state, the particles are there. Actually 5 particles, 5 quantum particles, and then I let them kind of expand in a bigger lattice. So in my mind, what I had in mind is you can have the fish tank, right, sealed, and you have a smaller one, and you open. The big one is empty, the small one has the gas. You open a little door and let it expand, and the question for me was, what happens? Okay? So interestingly enough, in quantum theory, because of quantization, we have quantum stationary states. In quantum theory, one can calculate this time average I was mentioning before that are difficult in classical physics. One can calculate them without doing any dynamics. Okay, so, and in this initial state, I knew that this probability distribution had this shape, and I also knew that the time average had this other shape. So there were 2 big questions that I had to answer. The first one is, as the system evolves, are you going to get crazy fluctuations about that average so that there is no sense of equilibrium in a quantum system? That was really what the structure of the quantum equations would suggest. That's one possibility. And the other question was, is that average in any way related to this idea of ergodicity and thermal distribution? Good, so let me show you the first result. It was, these are 5 particles. You remember 900 classical particles? It took some time, and there were big fluctuations. So now let me show you 5 quantum particles when they go into this piece. So that was pretty amazing and surprising to me. So in some short time, it went to the average, and the fluctuations were very small about the average. So it was remarkable. That's already suggesting, well, good. So even though this system is quantum and is very special because of being quantum, the dynamics brings you to something that doesn't change in time, like I showed you for the classical particles. Now the next question was, can I predict this distribution using ergodicity and thermalization? And the answer was yes. So you see this thermal prediction is this distribution in here, and you see it's exactly the same as the time average. So, and at this point, what you see is that those same principles that apply to the classical systems apply to these quantum ones. Okay, so time evolution brings you to something that almost doesn't change in time, and you can describe using the principle of ergodicity and statistical physics. So now the mechanism, right, because I was telling you that the structure of the equations was different, the mechanism is slightly different. In classical physics, you have an initial state, and I telling you as time goes, you have chaotic dynamics, and that brings you to the thermal state. In quantum physics, actually, chaos has played out already in the stationary states that form your system. So this quantum stationary state that we talk about, energy is quantized, chaos has already played out in there, and each of them looks thermal. So the picture that came out from this work is that those states are thermal. Your initial states can always be seen as coherent superpositions of those states, and as time goes, coherence, there is dephasing, disappears, and you see the thermal nature of the states. Okay, so that's something that's been tested in many different systems, and it's been tested in many quantum simulators. So by now, we know that this appears to be the correct picture, and is very robust. Good, so now you could ask, does that always happen? Well, you have to work very hard for something like this not to happen, but it doesn't always happen. As a matter of fact, we knew about systems that didn't satisfy this before we did this work. And this little demo in here already suggests how you can achieve that. So this is motion, you see, in one dimension, if you want. And I was showing you, well, they move and so on. Now, something very special happens if the masses are identical. Okay? So look at what happens if the masses are identical. So I'm going to push this one. This one stops. This one moves with the same velocity as this. Okay, I'm going to do it again. So you see it in there. That one stops. So really, these two car collisions, right, they don't change the distribution of velocities of the system, right? So this is actually something that is behind this toy in here, right? You play with this toy, so you see what happens if I right? So it's like this translated to here went up and then went that way. Well, before we wrote this paper and we learned about ergodicity, we actually thought that non-ergodicity was probably what would usually happen in quantum systems. And the reason was an experiment that was carried out here at Penn State in Dave Wise's group. And this is a very famous experiment now. It's called a Quantum's Newton's cradle. and it's a quantum version of precisely that toy that you have in there. So what Dave and his students did is they prepare these Bose-Einstein condensates in one dimension, and they apply laser pulses in a very specific way as to take each atom and make it an entangled superposition of two momentum that are equal in magnitude but opposite in direction. Okay, so it's similar but quantum to doing something like this. Okay, but since they are in that quantum superposition, not only did something like this play out, but also something like this was playing out in the experiment. So all these things were playing out, and this is how the setup looks like. So there are thousands of one-dimensional gases, okay, that he created in this two-dimensional lattice. He applied the pulses and looked at the dynamics, and this is how it looks. So this now you see like a picture of the momentum. Initially, as they are kicked, there is a finite momentum, and then as time goes, you see it goes down and up, very similar to the oscillations that you saw in there. And then after some time, you saw in there too, in the demo, things dephase, and there is dynamics in the tubes. There is dynamics in the tubes. Suspense. Okay, so there is dynamics in the tubes and dephasing, and after some time, he got that the distribution of speeds, if you want, of these particles look like this, which is unlike any Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution that we have, right? So that really showed that in this case, for these very special systems, something different happened. Now, I knew about that experiment before it was published, even though I didn't know Dave, so I started thinking about this problem even before this experiment was published. So, now, we theorists like to simplify things as much as possible, right? So you see, in this Newton's cradle experiment, there is a complication. In this Newton's cradle, there are forces, gravitational forces, slow down, push a thing. So I didn't want that. So I wanted an experiment, something like this, where there are no forces. Things don't move unless I push them. Okay? Here, you see, they move. So, and they are slowed down and pushed. So I carried out my own experiment in a different setup. These were the same sort of atoms, but in a flat trap. So, and this is what happened, and now I lost my clicker. Okay, let's see again. So I carried out now a numerical experiment in which I do something similar in a box. And I created, you see, a superposition of each atom in many different peaks, very different speeds or momentum, and I let it evolve. And this is what happens if you don't have a force in there. So remember that in the experiment, things slow down and accelerated. In here, all that happens is that these peaks broaden, very similar to that classical experiment I showed you, that you saw that things broaden and take the shape of the universal distribution, and then it stop moving, stop changing. So some sort of equilibrium was achieved in this system, but it was not thermal equilibrium. Okay? And the reason is that in these systems there are very special quantities that are conserved. And we all know about conservation of energy. In these collisions, there is also conservation of momentum. Right? In these experiments, there are many more things conserved. So one can generalize that Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution to have not one, but many temperatures. Okay? And when you do that, you can exactly describe that distribution after the system has equilibrated. So this is like a new type of distribution that after we show that this happens, now it's been found in, again, many different systems that have these properties that are very special. They are called integrable. And it also been done in experiments. And this has also become part of other theories, okay, this idea of these generalized distributions that aim to describe what happens long time after you've perturbed a system. So these other theories are called hydrodynamics theories and very similar to the theories that we use to model the weather. Okay, so what happens with the weather, of course, no one is solving 10 to the 23 atoms everywhere, right, in the planet. So what we are doing for the weather is we are splitting the planet in cells, which are in thermal equilibrium, and then we take into account that, well, there are flows of energy and of matter, and we try to see what happens. So these type of theories have been developed also for these very special systems in which this is that building block that is equivalent to the thermal equilibrium for regular systems. So good, let me just tell you then before I conclude. So these are things that are established and have been tested in many experiments. Let me tell you briefly what are the things that we are thinking about these days. Okay, and this is work that we've done now in collaboration with Dave Group. So the question that we are thinking about these days is how quickly can you use these hydrodynamic theories to describe the later dynamics of the system, right? So it's sort of, for some time you have to use these full quantum calculations are very complicated, but after some time you can stop and then go and move and do these hydrodynamic calculations, which are similar to the ones that are used for the weather, but for these quantum systems. Now, as it turns out, this is a problem in another area of physics, not the one dealing with the coldest matter on Earth, but the one dealing with the hottest matter of Earth, on Earth. So this is a problem that arose in relativistic heavy ion collision. So you see in big accelerators, they smash nuclei against each other, and these nuclei are formed by neutrons and protons, and those ones are formed by quarks and gluons, and they deconfine, and there is some pre-equilibrium dynamics no one knows how to describe. And then after, they use hydrodynamics theories, and they follow all the dynamics up to the kind of thing that are the particles that they can measure in the accelerators, in the detectors in the accelerators. So in the coldest matter on Earth, we were able to think about what happens here before you can use these hydrodynamic theories. And this is sort of a simulation of what happens in Dave's experiment. Both, I mean, this is a color-coded simulation of the momentum distribution. So this is, you see, momentum is speed, this is time, and the color tells you how many atoms you have in there. It's not very important to understand all the details. The important thing is that at this hydrodynamization time, really most of the dynamic has played out, and you see in here, there are fluctuations that mostly have played out, right? And this happens, and that's, we can understand now through the theory in a time scale that is determined by the speed, okay, of the particles in this peak. So for the heavy ion collision, it would mean the speed of these ions, okay? And in a more recent paper, what we did is apply the same theory that we used to understand this coldest matter on Earth. We applied it to this hottest matter, and the time that came out was precisely the time that they see in this experiment. Okay, so this was very satisfying. It's like you develop a theory in one limit, right, coldest matter, but that's the beauty of physics. So it can apply in a very wide range of situations, and it describes what happens in here. Now, this was also very satisfying because this kind of physics was the one that I studied as an undergraduate student in Havana, Cuba. So to really be able to get these time scales, I had to go back to papers I wrote as an undergraduate student, and this is the first paper I wrote as an undergraduate student, and use things that I learned there to explain this. So on this note, I am going to end this lecture. I hope you will take from here that, as Dave mentioned, there is a second quantum revolution happening in technologies, and this revolution is stepping on fundamental developments that have been carried out over the years and continue to occur, and that hopefully are going to become technology in the near future. And with that, thank you for your attention.
Marco, for a wonderful and amazing talk. We're going to start with our Q&A session. So all of you should have an index card. If you have a question, please raise your hand and wave it. One of our undergrad students, where are the undergrad students? Are going to take the index card and are going to bring it here and I'm going to read the questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, wave it like this. If you have more questions later, please write it down and also raise your hand. And for now, I would like to start with one personal question. So you mentioned that air is, as an example of a classical gas. So is there anything quantum at all about air right now? Or for example, if you see that balloon there, is anything quantum at all?
Good. So is there anything quantum about classical gas? Actually, as I emphasize, everything is quantum, and when I mentioned I'm going to focus on these gases, I was telling you what is classical is about the motion. Okay, so even if you have a classical gas and you shine light on it, what type of frequency, what specific frequencies it will absorb and emit, even though it's classical gas, is going to be dictated by quantum physics. Now, there is something about air because of the diatomic molecules that is quantum, and it actually affects our pockets. So how much we pay for electricity or for gas, heating in the winters and cooling in the summers. So let me tell you why that is. So when we add heat to a substance, right, we raise the temperature, right? Now, how much we raise the temperature depends on something that is called the specific heat. Okay, so this specific heat is something that we can calculate for different materials and so on, and there is quantum physics in there. Now, for the particular case of air, we have that is mostly formed by nitrogen, right? So it's a diatomic molecule, right? So now, what is the specific heat of a gas of diatomic molecules or a general gas depends on in which ways, right, these molecules can invest the energy that you give them, right? So one way they can invest it is by moving around, right? Like monoatomic gases, right? The atomic gases, they can move around, they can rotate, right? And the other thing that they can do is vibrate. So classically, if you compute the specific heat, you get a value. As it turns out, the experimental value that you can measure is smaller. Okay, so the specific heat of air is smaller, and the reason is quantum physics. So the reason is quantization of energy. So the vibrations of those molecules are frozen at room temperature. So if we would live at much higher temperature when air would be classical, then we would have a higher specific heat, but at room temperature, those vibrations are frozen, the rotations are active, vibrations are frozen, so specific heat is smaller than what you would predict classically. If you go to even lower temperature, you can reduce it even further because you can freeze the rotations. Okay, so there you go. So there is something quantum about air and about how much heat you need to increase its temperature by a certain amount.
So maybe a question related to temperature from the public. What is the benefit of high versus low temperatures?
Okay, so high temperature is where we live, right? So the low temperature regime is the regime that you need to go to be able to make things quantum. Okay, so it's only at low temperature that you can start using quantum entanglement and these quantum phenomena to, advance quantum computations and so on. So this is all the reason that we like the low temperature. That's where we get to the quantum regime and where we take advantage of quantum physics.
A second question from the public is, what can Einstein condensates be used for? Can be they used for quantum computing, for example?
Right. So here at Penn State there are actually efforts. So you can load those Bose-Einstein condensates in optical lattices, and you can use now these atoms there in those sites as qubits. So, and you can try to generate, and there are efforts in different groups, specifically in Dave's group and in other groups around the world, of developing quantum computation using optical lattices. So that's one of the directions. So there are other people using ions, superconducting qubits, and so on. So Bose-Einstein condensates in optical lattices are a potential path for quantum computation.
A specific question. I think, I don't know the number of slides, but the slide about quantum thermalization with the axis. Like
This one?
No, one with X, Y, Z axis.
Oh, okay, Bose-Einstein condensate. Okay, let's look at it. Here. That's, I think, the only one that has the X.
I'm not sure, but you show a three-dimensional coordinate system at the bottom.
Yeah. So maybe if the person that asked the question want to clarify what the question was. XYZ. Oh, here, this. Okay, good.
Is any reason for showing the axis in that orientation, like X, Y, Z, instead of Y, X, Z?
Right. So I believe the experimentalist is in here that in this direction is where gravity is, right? So gravity makes a difference, right, for this system. And C is chosen to be the direction of gravity. And you see, they want to compensate for gravity, so they introduce gradients in the fields to be able to locate those Bose-Einstein condensates in some specific place in those traps. Okay?
The question was, is there any difference to place X on the left and
Oh yeah, no, I mean, there is no real difference. I mean, you could call X the Z direction and so on. All that is in here to keep in mind that with respect to this picture, gravity is along this direction. Okay, but what you call X, Y, or Z, not important.
Do you have any comment about, I think the word is entanglement in quantum mechanics?
Yeah, so I didn't talk at all about entanglement, but really this is behind what is happening in this thermalization phenomenon. So you see, in context of entanglement, you can think about this initial state as an unentangled state of this piece of the system and this other piece of the system, right? And now when you let it evolve in here, you get that everything gets entangled. And you can also think about the gas that you have in this system, as you have these quantities in here we call the probability of the velocities. So these are like something that is related to a single particle. So you see, it's like similar to these classical gases. You look at particles and you get their velocities, but there are here states, these are many particle states, and the entanglement, we think of quantum thermalization as a process in which the entanglement in the entire system, okay, between all these particles is the one that produces this thermal description. So indeed, entanglement in this system is playing out as time evolves and is increasing. Okay, so if we were to look at in any place in here and measure how it's entangled with the rest, during this quantum evolution, the entanglement is growing, and when it reaches thermal equilibrium, it stops growing, and that's when you get the maximal entanglement. Okay, and this we relate to thermalization.
Bose-Einstein condensation. So Bose-Einstein condensation particles flow with almost no resistance. Why is it significant for quantum computers?
Right, no, that aspect of Bose-Einstein condensation is not important for quantum computation. So as a matter of fact, when those Bose-Einstein condensates are loaded in these lattices, one usually goes to states that are not superfluid to carry out quantum computation. Okay, so that aspect of Bose-Einstein condensation is not useful. What is important is that this is a very low temperature state, okay, and then all the quantum phenomena can play out when you load it into the lattice and go to a different quantum state.
Next question. What is the explanation in quantum physics for gravity? How you incorporate gravity to quantum physics?
Yeah, so that is the big open question. So you see, physics is developing, if you want, you could see it in two big directions. So one direction is the direction of complexity. So like in this system, we know the underlying laws, and when you put many systems, many particles together, you get new things, Bose-Einstein condensates, superconductors, and so on. The other direction, right, are what are the fundamental forces and so on. And indeed, gravity is one for which we don't have a full quantum treatment. And that's a big open question, but is happening at, if you want, another scale from everything that I have been talking about here. So in this talk, gravity was playing essentially no role.
So lots of research are taken at extreme temperatures, really low,
Yes.
really high. How do processes like photosynthesis occur at room temperature?
Yeah, no, that's those processes happen at room temperature, and at that, you see, in these systems that we are studying here, there is no life. There is it's all very cold, and it's all about the quantum phases. Okay, so no photosynthesis happening in there.
Okay, so you came from Havana, Cuba. Then you go to different places in Germany and the US. What brought you to Penn State? You mentioned collaborations. What are other strengths Penn State has such you take the decision to come here?
Good. I mean, what brought me was the physics department at Penn State is amazing. And you see, I was already thinking about experiments that were carried out here at Penn State way before I knew people from the department. So the physics department was really what brought me to Penn State. So great physics department, great graduate program, so great colleagues.
Are you enjoying your experience here?
Yes, very much.
Last question. Yes, someone else has more questions. So what is next for your research in the following years?
Right, so that's, we wake up every day and it's like, okay, what challenge do I take up now? So I was telling you, one of the things we are thinking about these days is how fast is fast, right? So we are thinking about these problems, and we are also thinking about how one can challenge this thermalization hypothesis, if you want. So this is now a frontier of research. So a lot of us are thinking, how can you prevent thermalization as those systems could potentially be used to store quantum information, to do quantum computation, and they are just fundamentally interesting, right? Most of the systems that you try to generate, they thermalize. I show you if you have one dimension, something special happens. So we know there are other systems for which special things happen, and we are trying to understand them. So, let's see what comes out of that.
That was the last question. Thank you so much, Marco, for your talk.
Thank you.
Hold on for a second. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alexandra Seshislavkovich. I'm Professor of Statistics and the Associate Dean for Research in the Eberly College of Science. Thank you for joining us today, and just please stay for a few more minutes. Marcos, on behalf of everyone here today, online, and the entire Eberly College of Science community, I would like to thank you for a very engaging presentation. My goodness, live presentations, that is absolutely awesome in helping us all understand some basics of classical and quantum gases. I've certainly learned a lot. Thank you so much. Just a little token of thank you. Thank you. I would also like to thank David for his introductory and opening remarks and introducing the quantum mechanics. Here at Penn State and Eberly College of Science, we have many outstanding researchers who are working and exciting actually in solving many new challenges in quantum science overall. So that's super exciting, a lot of great work happening right now. I would also like to thank our absolutely terrific staff from the Eberly College of Science Communications Office and the Office of Associate Dean for Research for organizing this lecture series. Today with us we have Heather Robbins and Michelle Bixby. Okay. Thank you so much. For moderating the Q&A, we have our two graduate student volunteers, Cristobal Gallegos, a doctoral student in physics, and Katie N, our doctoral student in biology, who is also one of our science graduate student fellows in the Eberly College of Science. We have today with us three absolutely terrific undergraduate student volunteers, Jacqueline, Haley, and Liesel. Did I get that right? Maybe you want to wave. Thank you again for assistance today. They're members of the college's Line Science group. So for all of you here, please take a moment and use the QR code on your screen. We have a very brief survey for you to complete. You heard me say this before. This is very useful to us in planning the future lecture series and lecture talks. Please leave your email address so you can be notified about any upcoming talks. With this talk today, we wrap up 2025 Ashtekar Frontiers of Science lecture series. It was wonderful having you all with us this year. We hope that you will absolutely join us next year as well. And before you leave, as Marcus said earlier, you're welcome to come down and look at all this wonderful equipment that Marcus has brought, and toys, I guess. Is it a toy? Would you consider it a toy? That he used today to demonstrate a couple of different concepts. Again, thank you very much. If you are leaving, have a great weekend and hope to see you next year again. Thank you.